If you haven't read the readings yet, I recommend that you read them now and stop the tape. So that's Acts 1, 1 to 11, and then Matthew 28, verses 16 to 20. Well, you might have noticed that there seems to be a bit of contradiction, which some scholars make a great deal of fuss about. That is, that in Matthew's Gospel we're told that Jesus had arranged to meet his disciples in Galilee, whereas in the account in Matthew of the Ascension here, that Jesus had told them to stay in Jerusalem after his resurrection and not to leave there. Well, obviously these accounts were written a few decades after Jesus' ascension into heaven. So there might have been a little bit of difference. Also, their particular theological interests, particularly Luke, has a great focus on Jerusalem throughout his Gospel and in Acts as well. So he might have concentrated on that. What's important is that Jesus is truly God and truly man, that he offered his life in sacrifice on the cross for us, that he rose again in the flesh, and then ascended into heaven, was taken up into heaven. Now, when we look at Matthew's Gospel, we can remember one of the great thrusts of his Matthew's Gospel, one of the interests is in showing how Jesus was the new Moses. So we have that right at the beginning of the Gospel when there are parallels with Jesus' life and the life of Moses. So, for instance, the slaughter of the innocents in Jesus' life by Herod mirrors the slaughter of the firstborn males by Pharaoh in Egypt of the Hebrew slaves. We have Jesus being baptized in water and the Hebrew people being taken by Moses through the Red Sea into the desert. We have Jesus going out into the desert where he was tempted for 40 days and 40 nights, and we have 40 years of temptation of the Hebrew people who've been set free from slavery in the desert and the wilderness. We have Jesus as the new lawgiver who gives us most especially the Beatitudes. Moses was the lawgiver, particularly giving the Ten Commandments in the wilderness. So there's a great emphasis on seeing Jesus as the new Moses, the new lawgiver. And Moses met God face to face on the mountain. So here and in other places, of course, we have Jesus going up the mountain. It's not just of topographical interest of the Holy Land. It's in fact a theological interest as well to mention that Jesus goes up a mountain. So Jesus meets his disciples up the mountain. And when the disciples saw him, some of them fell down and worshipped him. So they recognized him as God. Moses met God and spoke face to face with him, we're told, in the wilderness especially, up the mountains. So here we have a continuation really of this theme that Jesus is the new Moses who spoke to God face to face. And as we learn at the end of the book of Moses, there's never been a prophet like him. We're told at the end of the book of Deuteronomy that Moses went up the mountain and saw the promised land, but was not allowed to enter into it. And he died there. And he was buried then in the valley, but nobody ever found him afterwards. Likewise, Jesus, after his death, resurrection, he ascended into heaven. He wasn't found, not in his bodily form again. So Jesus then gives a command on this mountain in Matthew's Gospel that he has all authority, and he gives the authority to his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. And the command is that baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all the commands I have given you. Again, this goes back to the image of Moses who taught the Hebrew people to follow the commands that God had given him to pass on to the people. And now Jesus is saying the commands that he has given them, they must follow. So he's someone even greater than Moses. We find that shot through, especially in the 6 antitheses in chapter 5 of Matthew's Gospel in the Sermon on the Mount. But I say to you, and so on. So then we have this very important bit, and know that I am with you always, yes, to the end of time. When we're thinking of Jesus' ascension into heaven, we're not thinking of him going to some spatial place somewhere in the universe where he's going to dwell hundreds of millions of light years away from us. No, God is apart from his creation. He's apart from the whole universe. And the wonder of being God is that he can be everywhere throughout the whole universe. He's not timed down to one specific place. So when we think of him ascending into heaven, we're not thinking of him leaving us, which is why in Luke's Gospel, with the departure of Jesus, the disciples were continually in the temple praising God. They were being joyful. When normally you'd think of people being sad because their loved one has left them, they were joyful because they knew he was still with them. Now, when we read the account of the Ascension in the Acts of the Apostles, written by Luke, one of the great things that we see there is the cloud. And Jesus enters into the cloud, or he descends into the cloud, descends upon him. Again, this is a very important Old Testament reference that we need to look at. And we see a cloud signifies God's presence. So as Moses led the people, the Hebrew slaves, out from Egypt, what guided them during the day was the cloud, the pillar of fire by night. When Moses spoke with God on the mountain and received the 10 Commandments, it was shrouded in cloud. The Ark of the Covenant was kept in the tent of meeting, and that again was shrouded in cloud, signifying God's presence. And we find a similar idea, the theological idea of the cloud, in the New Testament as well. So, for instance, with Our Lady, who would be overshadowed by the Holy Spirit, we're told, as she conceived Jesus in her womb, the incarnation, God's presence was signified by the overshadowing of the Holy Spirit. And we find in the Transfiguration, the cloud descending upon Jesus, Moses and Elijah on the mountain as he took his inner quorum with him, Peter, James and John. And this cloud signified God's presence, and from the cloud came the voice, "This is my beloved Son, on whom my favour rests." So we find the same image again of Jesus being taken into the cloud. So this means not that Jesus has left us, not that he's no longer seen, but in fact that he is reabsorbed, if you like, that he never left it, reabsorbed into the Godhead, into the life of the Trinity. And as God can still remain with us, he will remain with us until the end of days.